There are signs of reform in Saudi Arabia, a country often blamed for allowing jihadist ideology to take hold. The elevation there of Mohammed bin Salman to Crown Prince, aged just 31, is being interpreted as a signal of change. Mina, who is this man and why should the world be taking notice of him?
Well, because Saudi Arabia is important. So we have to take notice of who will be the future leader of Saudi Arabia and someone who's young enough to lead for many, many years to come. He's someone that Saudis and people in the region know quite well over the last 2 years after he was named Deputy Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Minister of Defense, quite close to his father. But he's also someone who's young and someone who's brought a dynamism to Saudi, partly through Vision 2030, which some people like to brush up and say, oh, it's just, semantics.
This is about changing the economy,
it's about reforming
making people
the economy.
Work rather than rely on oil income and
Absolutely.
All things like that.
But the most interesting part of it is not just talking about the economy. It's the realization that you can't just liberalize the economy and leave society behind, which I think is an issue around the world, actually, because often you think, oh, let's just get economic solutions and leave society. And so really that impetus to try to change it. Now, of course, it comes at a time when the region is going, as ever, through so many tumultuous events. You started by referencing, of course, what's the tragedy of Mosul, and also the need to try to make the politics of the region not about sectarianism and brutal ideologies, and trying to think, how do states function? At the heart of what we're seeing in the Middle East is states falling apart, and we need to pull them together and have state structures function. And if Saudi Arabia stumbles, then the impact on the region is even worse than what we've seen so far. Sorry, you want
No,
to
I was just on the basis of this point about relations between states. What then do we make of Saudi Arabia apparently flexing its muscles so brutally towards Qatar?
Brutally is an interesting term. I mean, I would say you're seeing clarity from where, not Saudi Arabia alone, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, and other countries are actually standing and saying, we cannot have a small country in the region that's supporting non-state actors, that's supporting groups like everyone from al-Nusra to militias in Libya, cutting deals with militias sitting in Iraq, saying there comes a point where we have to call a spade, which is interesting because I think outside of the region, many people say, well, hang on, no, the problem is Saudi Arabia. But the reality is we do have a country in the region that has been supporting extremist elements, but also this idea of non-state actors. You know, whether you have the Taliban having a representative office as though it is an embassy, these are signals that actually have detrimental effects on people's lives. And that's what we're seeing translated in the region.
Jeff, is this a consequence, some of this at least, of President Trump's recent visit to the region and his very strong message of support to Saudi Arabia?
Well, the reporting is that the Saudis felt empowered by the green light that they got from Trump, who also pushed very hard, I think, to say that Mohammed bin Salman was going to be the pick of the United States, the bet. Jared Kushner had him to dinner at his house earlier this year in Washington.
Can I cut you off for a second? Only because I find it fascinating how the U.S. for the longest time was like, we like Mohammed bin Nayef. He's our pick.
Oh, I know.
And the minute Mohammed bin Salman is doing well, it's like, oh, this is America's pick. Somehow I'm not sure America gets the call.
No. This is the kind of thing what Trump said. I take credit, as he does for so many things that maybe don't have very much to do with it. There still is no evident American policy. And I think that's the thing that's, despite all the faffing around one way or the other, I mean,
And it's baffling, isn't it? We get these mixed signals. So we have, for example, the president tweets, I think, that on the question of Qatar, well, all reference was pointed to Qatar as funding extremism. Perhaps this will be the beginning of the end of the horror of terrorism. And then we're hearing from the US Defense Department, from the Pentagon, well, we're very grateful that Qatar is such a stout ally.
Yeah, we have a big base
we have
there.
a military base.
And we sold $12 billion. The United States sold $12 billion worth of fighter jets to Qatar just 3 days later. So, I mean, this is complicated, of course. but besides that, the fundamental thing is that Trump does not believe in policy. His mind doesn't work that way. I mean, remember the cruise missiles into Syria? What follow on? He said he was going to have a make the people in Syria safe. What happened there? He likes to throw something into the middle, get the attention, get the buzz, and move on without the complex process that other presidents have had. And he hasn't filled most of the subordinate positions in the State Department or the Defense Department. There's actually nobody minding the store except for the guys at the very top, and they disagree with each other, and there's no way of resolving their disagreements. And as long as Trump is president, I fear that's going to be true in almost all foreign policy. It's going to be bad.
Is Saudi Arabia really seizing a moment here where there is a bit of a vacuum in terms of Washington's attention and consistency that actually, all right, he may make a lot of noise, but he's comparatively weak figure at the moment in the Middle East?
Well, I think there was a vacuum when Obama was president too, when it came to the region. I mean, the fact that you had Obama refer to the leaders of places like Saudi Arabia and Egypt as Sunni leaders. You know, the fact that they were Sunni has nothing to do with the leadership of countries like Saudi Arabia, Egypt. So I do think it's less about seizing the opportunity of a vacuum. There was a vacuum, but there was a moment when, yes, they have to stand up and start sorting out what's going on in the region. One of the issues really at stake is what's happening in Iraq and Syria. And in the US, you're right. I mean, you had, first of all, we thought Trump was going to take some action on Syria, then didn't. Iran has just launched a ballistic missile into the heart of Syria. Very little reaction from the US. So there is a moment where the leaders of the region feel like we have to take action to try to control the situation.